Hey, Sam, this is Will from Cincinnati.
Will from Cincinnati, what's on your mind?
Hey, I wanted to talk to you guys about the David Shore piece I was making the rounds about popularism. I don't know if you guys addressed it. I missed the first half of the show.
Have not. I'm really going to get into that soon, I think, next week. But yes, go ahead.
Well, I read the piece. I read some of the discourse. I got very frustrated at Matt Yglesias' take, basically asserting that Democrats would be better to campaign on popular policies, and the political penalties for implementing popular policies is greater than just not doing it. You know, like the common wisdom just blows my mind. And
wait, articulate that again. You're saying say that again. So I'm not sure.
Let me reword it. Matt Yglesias and David Shore, from what I understand from the piece, are basically stating that the common wisdom is that Democrats should campaign on popular things and not actually implement it, because the potential blowback of implementing popular policy from, like, you know, bad faith Republican attack ads would be greater than just not implementing it at all.
So the blowback from implementing popular policies would be worse than not implementing the popular policies. That's what you're saying that they're arguing?
That's my understanding, that there'd be less blowback if you just promise good things and not do it from your base than the political blowback from bad faith Republican attack ads. And part of the problem I have with that is that, we played that Medicare ad the other day. It really doesn't matter Democrats don't get to dictate what Republicans do. I would argue that it is really just a question of space. When you don't do these things, you create vacuum. You create a vacuum. And I agree with the idea that, like, you know, voters just get what ultimately voters hear, the vast majority of them, is sort of like a third level reflection of what is actually going on. But I just think that doing things creates an aura of power. And it really, you know, in many respects doesn't, it matters because the way that you project that aura of power is not just by doing things in a vacuum. You do them because there is an enthused group of people who are around you psychographically, and I'm talking about the activists, who then carry that message to the broader population. I mean, I'm not convinced. I mean, I do think that they sort of recognize a problem, but I'm not convinced that they provide a solution, frankly, to what they're saying. I mean, I do think that you should have likable candidates, but I don't. I think we'll get more into it too. Dane's got a good piece, deliverism, that he called it, I think, at the American Prospect. I read his article. It was excellent, and it kind of encapsulated my feelings on it. I just really questioned the disconnect of these politicians and these campaign advisors who seem to earnestly believe that, yes, please, campaign on all these popular policies that the American people love. We're polling. They love it. But please don't implement it. We're really afraid of the Republican blowback if you actually follow through.
Well, the problem is with that is that it discounts the second order issue, which is they're losing.
Yes.
I mean, Bill Clinton, the one thing I think he had correct was strong and wrong is better than right and weak.
Yeah.
America likes a winner, period. End of story. And delivering on what you promise and then going out and characterizing that as a win, and the way that you characterize that as a win is because people who you promised it to, who are really paying attention, also go out and characterize it as a win, wins for Americans. End of story. I mean, I mean, I think it's both in the case that I've observed in terms of like the way that America perceives an underdog. We've talked about this in the past. I spent some time in Australia 30 years ago. It may have changed there, but at the time there, an underdog was somebody who lost. In Australia, they had a much more appreciation for someone who went up against someone they were supposed to lose to and tried, but lost. In America, you're the underdog and you lose, you're forgotten. You're done. Alfred Hitchcock had a really interesting thing to say about films in America. He said, if I showed a character in the first minutes of a movie being competent at their job, I could make them into a serial killer and the audience would still appreciate them because Americans like competence. It doesn't matter how horrible of a person it is. If they can show that they're competent at their job, Americans give them a benefit of the doubt.
Which is why the right-wing attacks might be sticking a little bit on Biden.
Josh Marshall had a theory during the aughts called forgive me, the bitch slap theory. And it was basically, the problem with Democrats was that they kept getting, they kept losing and getting pushed around. And people just had this general sense of like, you can't even defend yourself. How are you going to defend us? How are you going to defend our interests? So, but we'll talk more about this. It's an interesting topic. Appreciate the call.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, it seems to me, and I haven't read it, I'm not super interested, but it seems from the outside look like it's rationalizing what's happening right now. Like, this is what the Democrats are doing. They're running on popular things and then not doing it. And I actually think that actually might be successful. I'm not one of these people that think like Biden needs to pass something really big, otherwise the Republicans are going to win everything.
Part of Shore's argument is that the cultural things that the Democratic Party promotes now, anti-gun, even voting rights, frankly, I mean, he perceives, I think I mean, ultimately, but supposed wokeism, et cetera, is alienating an important part of the Democratic constituency. It also, that is predicated on the notion that you can get those people back, or that Ted Cruz or Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo or Ron DeSantis can motivate those voters in the way that Donald Trump did. I mean, we're going to find out, maybe not in 2022 and maybe not in 2024, but we're going to find out 2028 if Donald Trump was sui generis. We may find out sooner. But there's also it's not taken for granted that in the absence of a fake American socialist black president, and in the absence of a guy who's both gets the credibility of being a billionaire,
the giant TV celebrity known throughout culture.
Right. Yes, exactly. In the absence of those guys, whether that's actually going to work. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different theories in terms of like why Trump did better than expected with Latin voters and black voters. And there's some people who refute that was actually even the case in some respects. But,
well, I mean, there's nobody who projects victory or projects like, I'm going to be dominant more than Trump.
There's also, I think, like, there's things like machismo, but I also think that I think was like an issue. But I also think for people who are marginalized, and this maybe has to do more with like some segments of the Latin or Hispanic groups where people are, and maybe some other immigrant groups, or people who are perceived as being from an immigrant group, even though they've been in this country for an extended period of time, that when there is pressure associated with like where there's this much nationalism there is a tendency sometimes to say, like, I'm going to prove my American bona fides.
Right. I'm committed.
I'm committed. But there's also, there's other theories. But, so I don't know. We'll talk about it. I do think it's interesting.